Good morning, everyone. It is 7 o'clock, November 10th, 2020. We'll call this meeting of the Fergus Falls City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Roll call, please.
Fish.
Here.
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 Yeah.
We have a quorum. First item of discussion this morning is an update on the Otter Tail Power Solar Project. We'll call on our city engineer, Brian Navarro. Good morning, Brian.
Thank you. Good morning, Your Honor, and members of the council. Before you is in regards to Otter Tail Power Company's Hoot Lake Solar Project and the corresponding environmental assessment worksheet. To begin with, Otter Tail Power is proposing to construct a 49.9 megawatt solar farm generally located east of town. Representatives from Otter Tail Power and HDR are here present at this time. I figured it'd be prudent to begin with to give you a little background presentation. They have a PowerPoint prepared for you. You also have a copy on your table, so we'll just answer any questions. Upon the completion, we're going to be the recommendation for action is we're requesting approve and authorize city staff to submit the environmental assessment worksheet to the Minnesota Environmental Quality Board EQB monitor. And I'm also requesting to set the EAW public hearing for Tuesday, December 8th, 2020. So at this time, I'll turn it over to representatives from Otter Tail Power.
Good morning, Randy.
Well, good morning, Mayor and members of the council. Thanks for hearing this item. And first, I do want to take a moment and thank your staff, Andrew Bremseth and Brian Navarro, have been great to work with to bring us to this point. I'll give a brief overview and some background on the project, and then Michael Mayer with HDR Engineering will provide more of the detail on the environmental assessment worksheet and the processes involved. Next slide. The proposed Hoot Lake Solar Project is a 49.9 megawatt solar facility with approximately 150,000 solar modules, and we expect that the energy that would come from that Hoot Lake Solar Project to provide enough energy to provide the equivalent of approximately 10,000 homes. Next slide, please. Minnesota has a solar energy standard in place where, as utilities, we're required to provide 1.5% of our retail load that would need to come from solar. And Minnesota also has a solar energy standard, or a solar energy goal of 10% by the year 2030. And we expect that this project will provide roughly 4%. So all of the 1.5 and a good portion towards that goal of 10% by 2030. And the other thing I'll say is that the Hoot Lake Solar Project is consistent with our company's approved resource plan that we've worked through with the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, which has outlined not only the Hoot Lake Solar Project. It wasn't Hoot Lake; it was a generic project at the time we went through the resource plan, and we'll go through some specifics as to why Hoot Lake is going to be an ideal location for this project. Slide 4, please. Part of the project footprint is currently within city limits, and part of it is outside of city limits. And in the upcoming weeks, we anticipate that Otter Tail will be petitioning the city for annexation for the remaining portions of that footprint, and so that would need the final action on that would need to take place after any action on the EAW. Next slide, please. Okay, the solar project is planning to reuse the existing infrastructure, and what you're seeing on the slide is a look at Otter Tail's generating resource across our service territory. And so the solar project is planning to reuse the existing substation for the Hoot Lake plant, and that's one of the big value propositions that this project in this location makes it valuable for our customers. And it's also a very significant fact as to why we are choosing this location over other locations, is that basically that ability to plug into the transmission grid and use the existing facilities. And next slide, and now I'll turn it over to Michael here to provide some more details on a question. Go ahead.
I have one question. Why 49.9? Are there different rules if you go over 50 or at 50 or?
Yes, there are different rules at 50 megawatts or larger. There is a Minnesota PUC, then you're regulated by the Minnesota PUC rather than going through local permitting.
Okay, thank you.
I got a couple of questions, and maybe I can wait till the end, but I'll maybe be appropriate now. Obviously, this is a huge project for the city and Otter Tail Power, and just a couple of questions. Obviously, there's been some concerns from residents that are affected by the proposed acquisition and build of this project. So just two questions, if you have the ability. First off, what are you guys doing to address and work with the residents that are affected by the properties abutting adjacent to the proposed project? And then secondly, I believe our ordinance in the city is maybe a little outdated, maybe not also up to scale to a size of the project that you guys are currently proposing. And so looking and getting some information, I was wondering if you'd be willing to comment on if Otter Tail Power is willing to follow the Minnesota Solar Model Ordinance versus the city ordinance and the differences between the two of them.
Okay, there's a lot of questions in there. And so I want to address each one of them. Once a little background as to the process that we've gone through to this point. First, in securing the footprint for the project, of which you'll see on, I think, slide 5 there, the footprint that's outlined in pink. In securing that first, of which some of it we own, some of it we purchased, and then once we secured that, then the next step we went through is we let all the homeowners know, gave them a heads up, hey, we're planning on going through this process of putting a solar project in this area. And so we let folks know that before. We'd wanted them to hear it from Otter Tail first before they heard it from the press release. So we let folks know, and some of them we sat down face to face. Others was a phone call, and so we walked through that. And will we continue to work with homeowners as we move forward? The answer is yes, and it could be a range of options. Some of it could be concerns like, well, the view shed of how we what they see, and concerns about the fencing and things of that nature, but part of it is we want to, as we get further, and we're early on in this process, the design process, and but part of it is exploring those options, what is available as we move forward to work with. Now, I'd have to know specifics on what which homeowners and which items that concerns that they had. But we would want to work with each one individually to address their concerns.
Fair enough. And then the second question was, our city ordinances, I don't think, entails a project of this size and the scope, and ours might be a little out of date. Would Otter Tail Power be willing to, there's a state ordinance on solar power. Minnesota has a state ordinance on solar power and things of this nature. Would that be something in conjunction with working not only with those landowners, but also looking at that and coming up with a plan to address concerns they have, but also potentially look at the state ordinance and follow that?
Now, when you say the state ordinance, is that referring to I know there's one of the state organizations has a what I'll call a model ordinance that cities and counties can adjust accordingly, and we have walked through that, and I think we'll find that most of what is in that model ordinance we've taken into account.
All right. So,
I'll turn it over to Michael Mayer now.
Michael, okay, thank you, Randy.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we got into this a little bit already, but just the location of the project, it's bounded by the Otter Tail River to the north and Highway 210 to the south. And the portion of Main Street that is east of town is what bisects that project. You notice here the black outline, that's the 450 acres of the site. However, only the pink is what's developed. And so you see it's kind of sited to the maximum extent to avoid wetlands and some of those other issues, environmental issues that are located on the site. And so of the 450, 350 acres, 355 acres will be developed. The other thing to point out is the yellow box up in the left-hand corner and the orange box. The yellow box is the Hoot Lake Power Plant right now, and the orange box is the existing substation that this would tie into. And the lines, the blue lines and the red lines are transmission corridors. So, next slide, please. Great, thank you. So, what is an EAW and why are we doing it? I don't know everyone's familiarity with the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act, but this slide is just to give a little bit of a primer on it. So, the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act requires state agencies and local responsible government units, RGUs, to consider the impacts of government actions on the environment. And there's two different types of documents that are used to consider these impacts: an EAW, or an environmental assessment worksheet, or an environmental impact statement. The EAW itself is not meant to approve or deny a project, but inform decision makers as they go into permitting and other approvals. The EAW is a document that describes the features of the project, and this is what you have in your package. Describes the features of the project, as well as whether or not there's a need to actually develop an environmental impact statement. So whether or not those impacts could be significant, such that environmental impact statement is necessary. What the EAW does is provides permitting information. It also informs the public about the project, and also helps identify ways for the project proposer to avoid or minimize impacts to the environment through the construction, operation, and maintenance of the project. For this project, the proposer, Otter Tail, supplied the necessary data for the RGU, Fergus Falls, and the EAW is then completed through the MEPA process. So why is it being prepared for the City of Fergus Falls? So Section 4410.4300, subpart 3 of the Minnesota Administrative Rules really guides this requirement. So in that, because of the size of this project being 49.9 megawatts, it's a mandatory environmental assessment worksheet. And so B kind of describes that anything over 25 megawatts, but less than 50 megawatts, that's not going to get a air permit from PCA, is prepared, the EAW is prepared, and the local government unit is the RGU. So that falls to the local government. And the EQB rules identify two potential RGUs. Because this project is kind of half in the City of Fergus Falls and half in unincorporated Otter Tail County, but there's an expectation for Otter Tail to move forward with an annexation request. The decision between the two was that the City of Fergus Falls would take the lead as the RGU because they had more permitting authority going forward than Otter Tail County. And that was, the county passed that resolution September 22nd this year in support of the city being the RGU line. But there is coordination happening between the city and county on different aspects of the project. Next slide. So in terms of, next slide. Okay, great, thanks. So in terms of what's actually considered in the EAW, typically there's the EAW is a form that the Environmental Quality Board puts out. It's about 19 questions or categories of things that they want information on. This list is primarily the resource topics that they were looking for, determining whether or not or what level of impacts may occur with each of the different resources. So changes in land use, impacts to geology and soils, water resources, including wetlands, fish and wildlife, historic properties, cultural resource issues, visual impacts, air resources, transportation, as well as looking at cumulative potential effects. So this project combined with other projects in the area that may result in a cumulative effect to a particular resource topic is also considered in this. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process, the draft EAW is before the council to review. The city council would make a recommendation, a completeness determination, and approve the EAW for publication. The next step would then be publication of the EAW in the Environmental Quality Board's monitor, which is the state clearinghouse for EAWs and EISs. It'd also be distributed to a number of agencies, state agencies, the county, others, interested parties, and be available for public review. We would also put a notice in the paper indicating that it's available. There'd be a link on the city website directing folks who wanted to take a look at it to where the files are located so they can review the EAW as well. Once that notice is published in the monitor, it kicks off a 30-day public review period. And it's 30 calendar days. So our expectation is if there's approval, it would be published on November 30th, and there'd be a 30-day comment period through December 30th. During that period, the proposal is to host a public hearing on December 8th. It's really an information meeting for the public. The public can ask questions about things, but we encourage all comments to actually be submitted either in writing, either through the email process or through letters, so that we can make sure we characterize all those comments and analyze them and respond to them. Once that comment analysis is completed, then we move to the next step of the EAW process, which is preparing findings of facts and a determination whether an EIS is necessary. And if not, moving on to kind of the next part, which is approving, the city would then approve that determination, that draft determination. Once that draft determination is approved, the notice of the decision will be published in the monitor again to give the public information that that decision's been made. And if a negative EIS declaration is the ultimate result of the EAW process, then the project would move to project permitting at that point.
Maybe miss this, but is the EIS a more in-depth study, or what's the EIS versus the EAW?
Yeah, so an EAW is supposed to be a briefer document,
Okay.
where you're really trying to determine whether or not there's this threshold of impacts could be significant or not.
Okay.
And if those are, then you do a much more detailed analysis of potential impacts. The EAW has a detailed analysis behind it. You know, there's backup studies and reports that are available to look at. It's just supposed to be more of a summary document to look at impacts and make that determination.
Thank you.
The EIS process also has a different public involvement process as well. There's scoping that would happen, as well as then public comment periods on the draft EIS and those other steps. Usually it's a longer process.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So then in terms of the overall project process, next slide, please. So the hope is to have the EAW process complete this winter, to Otter Tail to move forward with the annexation requests of those unincorporated parcels. There's also a right-of-way on that, in those parcels, and there's a petition to consider abandoning that. In spring 2021, in summer, is when Otter Tail would enter into the permitting phase more fully, with then construction happening sometime after all the permits are received. And it's kind of to be determined, because there's a lot of things in play, and some of those things will be conditions of the permits in terms of timing and seasonal restrictions and those kinds of things, as well as availability of construction contractors and equipment. So, and next slide. I think that's all we have for the EAW process and presentation. So if you have any other questions.
Yeah, thank you. I just to clarify the timing. So we're suggesting this morning that they recommend to the council to start the EAW process to allow that to move forward. And then there's a 30-day period. There's a December 8th. Well, and a question on that, is that just a timing of the 30 days from, or is there a reason it's a Tuesday night, not a Monday night at a regular meeting?
So
Not to get in the weeds on that, I just want to make sure the public has the best opportunity to participate.
Yeah, I can answer that. Can you hear me fine?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, previously, the last EAW we did was for the RTC project, that's phase 2. And very typical too, just like them, we're following the same process. We did it instead of a council meeting, a Tuesday meeting, just with all the MDH guidelines and everything. But that's typically what we've done in the past.
Sure.
So it starts at 5, and I believe we'll put the notice in, but there'll be an official presentation similar to this. I believe at 5:30, but we're working on that.
Okay, sounds good.
You're welcome.
And then there's, thank you, Brian. And there's a 30-day period, so the public has the opportunity to ask questions at that public hearing, has a chance for 30 days to submit comments, questions, and then the EIS is findings are presented, and at that point, the city council would need to make a determination. Is that correct? So there's a period, that would be sometime in early January, I assume, correct?
There's a period where the council would have the chance to review those draft findings, review the comments that were received and the responses to them, and then move forward with.
So as we initiate this EAW's process, the public's going to have plenty of opportunity to talk to us, to engage in the process, to ask questions, and to go through this. So there'll be lots of dialogue and opportunity for the public. We're not making any just final decisions anytime soon. We're just starting the process so that the public and Otter Tail Power can be engaged in conversation. Is that accurate?
It is. The point at this point is to release the draft EAW for the public to actually look at and be informed about, so that their comments can be informed related to potential impacts and the description of the project.
And that last thing from me, the EAW, it doesn't just take only, I mean, it's an environmental assessment worksheet, but the visual, the air, just the overall, all the public comments are going to be considered into that document. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. So noise.
It's not limited to what we might think of as environmental water quality or something like that. It takes into the big picture the concerns of the neighborhood. Certainly. Okay, thanks. Other questions? Scott?
This is probably a question for Randy, but the current Hoot Lake Power Plant, by comparison, what is the output there? This is a 49.9 megawatt project. What's the Hoot Lake plant currently put out?
The interconnection of the Hoot Lake is at 144 megawatts, so it's roughly 3 times the size of capacity of what the Hoot Lake solar project would be.
Okay. Then to follow up, is this project in Otter Tail's planning? I don't assume that you can answer this question, but if in the course of their planning, is this in any way first step or phase 1 of a future multiple area where this could be, you could put up another 49.9, across the river 10 years from now, and then another 49.9, and make this thing big enough so that it could actually use the capacity that Hoot Lake was doing, or replace it in that phase? I guess what I'm getting at is, I think you're thinking kind of small here, but go ahead.
I appreciate that. One of the short answer is we have a narrow window of opportunity with our interconnection to be able to reuse it. And so if whatever we use here, in this case the 49.9, that's what we'll be able to reuse. We won't be able to get another bite at that apple. And so we won't have another 50 without going through a much more rigorous interconnection process. So it's a one-time shot that we have. Because Hoot Lake is retiring, we have a window here to be able to reuse that interconnection.
I guess then to follow up, wouldn't you want to try and maximize it? If you can get 140 some out of there now, wouldn't you want to just try and use the whole shebang rather than just a third of it?
We a little background on that too. We did look at doing a larger project prior to this, but what happens is, because of the land requirements, it would require that much more land, and then the amount of transmission line to get it back to that interconnection point became overly burdensome cost-wise. And so it was a combination of what's available and the cost to get it back to that interconnection point.
I kind of got a follow-up to that.
Okay. Yeah, Caroline?
Okay.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Caroline.
So earlier in here, the goal is 10% solar energy. Is that just company-wide then, or like specific site-wide?
The 10% solar energy, that is a Minnesota goal that the state of Minnesota has for utilities.
So Minnesota as a whole is 10%, not
Correct.
Otter Tail Power is 10% solar.
Correct. That's a goal by 2030. What we're required as a regulated utility in Minnesota is the 1.5% today.
Okay.
Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Just to follow up on Caroline, you mentioned something about 4%. You said this project would accomplish 4% towards that 10%?
Correct. Yeah. We expect the energy that comes off of that enough to energize roughly 10,000 homes. That would represent about 4% of our Minnesota load.
Okay.
Jim, go ahead, Jim.
So what that 10% is about what Hoot Lake plant is? Is that correct?
I mean,
I mean, if you're at 4% for
Third of it.
49.9, Hoot Lake plant's 144, so it's about the same as what Hoot Lake plant going down is what you have as a goal to get.
correct. Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that because
I
of,
understand.
I don't understand, but I do.
the generating capacity with a thermal unit, you can turn it off and turn it on as needed. Of course, with a solar facility, you aren't turning it on at night, so it only generates when the sun is shining. Yeah.
One last question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I've worked in wind, so I know a little about that, but on solar, is there much noise that comes from that? I know with the wind, you just got the blade noise, but is there a hum or anything that you get out of solar, or what?
Primarily the noise that you would hear from it is going to come from the inverters. There'll be a handful of inverters where it's taking and converting it from DC to AC, and that's kind of like a transformer. So you'll have that type of noise that would be like a transformer hum.
Only a much bigger transformer.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you'll see in the map where those transformers are located, or those inverters are located throughout the project, and they're inside the boundary more so than
They're not
near
out
the
on the
edge.
edges then.
Correct. Correct.
Justin?
Maybe just a point of clarification, maybe this is for Brian. From a few of the residents that I had heard from regarding annexation, that being new to them, there were some concerns about their house being annexed in, and so if I understand this correctly after the presentation, the potential proposal of annexation going forward would be just the pink boundary of the project, not houses that are maybe outside the boundary but are abutting the pink boundary line. Would that be a fair assessment?
We're working on that, defining, but at this time, yeah, I'd say that's a fair.
Sure.
At the time, if they do want to petition, we would consider it, but we haven't formalized the official petition to annexation, so it's something we're working on at this time.
Thank you.
Is there anything within that annexation where we would surround one of the properties so that it would make sense for us to annex that also?
As noted, potentially, yes, but, it's petitioned through Otter Tail Power, so those are, like I said, concerns that we will look at, and, if we're surrounded in some instances like we have in the past, take that in consideration.
Anthony?
I got a couple of questions, mainly probably for obviously Randy, but obviously you're going to surround this project with an 8-foot tall fence, and it says a combination of chain link woven wire or deer fencing on the kind of the areas that kind of a front, like Main Street and 210. Can they be sort of aesthetically more pleasing than a chain link fence with kind of rolled barbed wire on the top?
The hope is to be able to work with Otter Tail, work with Fergus Falls, as well as any of the other entities that might have some permitting or safety requirements as to what the fence looks like.
Right.
So there may be some requirements related to reliability, that the fence has to be certain height with some kind of configuration for security purposes. But there is an intent, and you'll see in the EAW in terms of plantings along the fence line, and using the GNR's proposal or guidelines for like prairie pollinator habitat kind of plantings.
Because that's one of my other, it sort of says native seed mix, and it would be nice, obviously, if that could include, obviously flowers as opposed to just grasses. Because that, on an area like this, you'd almost have quite a lot of ability to have, the pollinator kind of resource, which would be good for everybody in the area too, and it's, again, look aesthetically pleasing.
And that's one of the things that's definitely being looked at in terms of where it would make sense to really put that type of planting versus other plants. So underneath the solar panels, the grass can only be about 12 inches high.
Yeah.
But outside, especially along the fence line, that's not a limitation.
Then, obviously on the MPDS permit portion, where do you anticipate then the stormwater? It's obviously, there's some mitigation of wetlands, but there's also going to be some stormwater runoff. Are you looking at using some of the wetland for that, or?
So the plan at this point is that, and what's interesting about solar is it's not quite an impermeable surface.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of different calculation that happens between whether or not it's like you're putting in a parking lot or you're putting in the solar panels in terms of the calculations, because the water will run off, drop on the ground, and
Dissipate.
Yeah. The idea during construction is that there will be some stormwater management needs, and there'll be some sediment basins put in that will then be reclaimed after construction's over. But there's no intent, or there's no expectation that a large stormwater management plan would be needed for the operation and maintenance of the project.
And then, I didn't realize you use vegetable oil in the transformers?
Yes, that's what we were told. Instead of regular oil, there's definitely been a move in transformers to get away from, to have more PCB-free.
And then, obviously nearby, and from a wildlife point of view, there's bald eagles to the north, and obviously, fluted shell mussels, which obviously does not imply that obviously there's any impact, but I think obviously that's something, if we can help obviously cultivate those, that's a good thing.
Sure.
Within the plant, with our head. It's kind of, and obviously, when it comes to construction, are you anticipating most of the construction would come from 210 as opposed to Main Street? Which would be the main route of access?
And so in those discussions, the main route that we're looking at now is to come in from 210 and then go up, I forget what the number of the street is, 220th Avenue or something on the east side. It goes up to Main Street to avoid, bringing in large equipment through town and residential areas.
Yep.
But we wouldn't be able to access the northern portion without going up to Main Street.
Right.
But there's a idea to have more directional traffic to avoid residential areas.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so at this point, we'd look for a motion to bring this to the council to authorize city staff to submit the Hoot Lake Solar Plan Environmental Assessment Worksheet and to set the public hearing for Tuesday, December 8th, 2020.
I'll make that, Your Honor.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Brent. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Thank you, Randy. We're going to move to item number 5, as long as we're talking about with Otter Tail Power here, and we're going to get an update on the Otter Tail Power streetlight project, and I'll call on Public Works Director Guy Taylor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm trying to get Nate Cundy unmuted here too, but are you unmuted, Nate?
Test. You got me, guy?
Okay, we do. Just to begin, I'll just mention that week before last, Andrew, Bill, and we met with Nate and Oscar Rajanimi from Otter Tail Power to talk about the next parts of the project. So right now, the project has been in the outer areas of town, coming down Lincoln. The next project will include more of the downtown areas and then going out south on Pebble Lake Road. So that's being looked at for phasing. And then Nate, now you can speak to the ongoing project of phase 1.
Sure. So we began phase 1, or talking about phase 1, I believe, back in December. Consisted of roughly about 100 lights. They are the spun aluminum 30-foot lights. They do have the banner brackets and the Christmas lights bracket with a receptacle on them. And then we also had another, I believe it was around 36 wood pole structures that we included in phase 1 of the project. So the wood pole portion of that has been finished. I believe that was roughly around the end of July, beginning of August. And that was really on Frontier, Western, North College Drive along the actual frontage of the campus there, as well as Tower Road north of Lincoln up to the intersection of College. So that is complete and is in operation. That kind of left us the bigger portion of along Lincoln, and then parts of Union, kind of the north side of Union, and then we ended up doing a little bit on Vernon and Court and Mill, I believe on the south side of the railroad tracks this year due to some storm damage stuff, and then also a little bit of a design change on what was planned for South Union, knowing that there was some potential road construction coming up with that too. So I guess as the project stands right now, all the light bases have been installed, all the conduits have been installed, all the conductors have been installed. Like just about every project this year, it hasn't been without challenges due to some COVID related items. We ran into some issues with our suppliers. One, just on getting some of the stamped stainless steel shims that we need for leveling the bases on it, and then two, also longer lead times on conductors that were needed for the project. So we did run into a couple, so they're small hurdles, but it just kind of delayed the overall project. Right now we have roughly, I believe there's about a half dozen or so standards actually set on the west end of Lincoln. This week we have about half a dozen employees dedicated to getting those structures put up, and yesterday the weather didn't help out causes by any means by getting some of those put up, but we're able to make progress in our laydown yard and kind of assemble the standards together and pre-wire them. That way when we come out on site, we're not spending that much time blocking traffic or having traffic to reroute around us.
So the question is then, when are they going to get done, particularly on Lincoln?
Yeah, we're shooting hopefully here by December.
Is that December 1 or December 31?
We're hopefully going to have it done by December 1st
Right.
on Lincoln.
Right. Yep. I'm more concerned about Lincoln. There's a lot of lights that currently don't work on Lincoln. So, and I know that's an area that residents have obviously had comments about in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Nate. Any other questions from the council? Thank you, Nate.
All right, thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and go to item number 4, as long as Trevor's with us, correct?
Yes.
Let's go ahead and, the other 2 items are discussion items, so let's go ahead and get item number 4 taken care of. And that is the 2021 proposed rates for the Pepper Lake Golf Course, and we have Trevor Gervais with us this morning. Good morning, Trevor.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I believe it's included in your packet here. We have our new proposed rates that we'd like to get approved. We have our annual meeting coming up next week. So if we're able to do that, we can share them with everybody at that time. So we have raised rates in a few years. So we do have some increases this year just to, keep up with increasing cost of supplies and maintenance and things like that. Just a slight change in structure on them, a couple new things. Instead of a true family membership, we have a couples membership now, and then for each 18 and under child you want to add, you pay per each of those, and it's a discount for those. It's all pretty much right there, so if there's any questions I can answer, please let me know.
Anyone like to be, Scott?
I have a question that doesn't have to do with the rates, it has to do with the golf course in general, so we can come back to that.
Let's get let's get a motion on the table to bring this to the council, and we'll have discussion. Justin,
Your Honor.
thank you. Jim? Okay. Any discussion on the rates themselves? Scott, did you have a?
Not concerning the rates, no.
Okay.
I want to say on the rates, there was no rate increase at all last year. So rates stayed the same. It's to the point where they need to have an increase because the cost of everything is more.
Sure.
And if it weren't for Arlen out there working on the equipment all the time, we'd be in tough shape because we've got a bunch of old equipment out there that he keeps running. And everything else increases, they need an increase there.
Sure. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to bring these recommendations to the council at the Monday night's meeting. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Scott, you had a general question about the golf course?
Yeah, since the golf course was on the table, so to speak, I had a couple of questions posed to me from a resident regarding the restaurant and how that operates and whether it could be a year-round operation or not and whether it does catering or not. And perhaps we could have an explanation or discussion about that at a future committee of the whole meeting to better understand how that goes. I don't need to introduce it today, but if we could do that at another meeting here soon, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Scott.
And
Jim.
I could speak to that.
Sure. Okay, we'll put that on a upcoming agenda. Thanks, Scott. Okay, moving along to item number 2, discussion on what the city should do with the proceeds from the sale of the city-owned parking lot, formerly Shopko site. And we'll try to call on Andrew Bremseth, but he's not sure if he has a microphone this morning. Good morning, Andrew.
Yeah, good morning, Your Honor members.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good.
Awesome. I wasn't sure if this was going to work. Glad to hear it. As you mentioned, Mayor, the next couple items here are more just discussion, open discussion, trying to get some direction from the city council. This first one here relating to the Shopko property, as you'll all recall, back on August 17th, the city council approved a purchase agreement with Rivers Edge Investments LLC for that city-owned parking lot in the amount of $328,000. We're projecting to close on that property March 1st or hopefully sometime before then. And a few of you have asked me to put this on the agenda so we can start talking about what we should do with the proceeds from the sale. I've heard various ideas from a few of you. I've also heard some suggestions that we put the funds back into the downtown riverfront project that's being worked on. So just wanted to open up a discussion today, and Your Honor, maybe it's prudent to start with Councilmember Kwame. He's thrown around a lot of various ideas and is the one who really asked that we have this discussion today.
Thank you, Andrew. Scott.
I had some concerns brought up by neighbors in the area. I mean, there are some residents that are near that particular lot that are real concerned about the loss of public parking. And even though the analysis showed that it was a relatively small number of cars using that lot, it's still a significant loss for people that depend on it, even if it's only a handful of people. And it's not a high-density residential area now, but for the few people that need a place to park and they're not allowed to park on a lot of Lincoln overnight anymore, it became kind of a concern. And so that's why I raised the question as to what we might do with the money from this, if there was any way to mitigate the loss of the public parking, once it gets turned into a private project. Also, the project that's been proposed to us that will be eventually built there, this multi-story retail and residential building, the parking that'll be required for the residential portion of that building as it stands, as it's been proposed to us, just barely, if at all, covers the requirements for what will be there. For the number of units that are there, there's not as many inside parking spaces in the garage portion of that project, and then with the additional retail and what's needed there, they're going to max out what's there. So it's not that there's going to be some leftover spaces that'll still be available to people who've been using that area. So it seems like we need to consider doing something to mitigate that loss. So with that as a background, a couple of suggestions I might throw on the table is that to the north of there, right across the street is the older Beal and McGowan building. Most recently it was a Kiefer warehouse sales building, a number of other things have been in there, and then that veterinarian is on right across the street up there. Just to the north of that, between that building and the railroad, is an area that has potential, I think, to become a parking lot for the city public parking lot right now, but has a little stretch of abandoned railroad, what was a spur there that is now not connected any longer. That seems like a real prime spot for what it's worth, that I think the city could pursue, trying to make a deal with the railroad and buy that property and make it into a parking lot. It's real close to what was, what's being lost, and I don't see that that particular property would have a real great use for anything else. And so that would be my first suggestion, that we pursue buying and making that area into a public parking lot. Another option that we might consider is the lot that we already have over near Lundine's on the corner of Cavour and Court. We've got a lot next to Pickett's that is currently gravel. And maybe we use the money and make that into a paved parking lot and improve it. Or the lots that are behind Lundine's or that are behind Solani Clips that are currently paved but are in really terrible shape, that we may use the money to improve the lots that we already have. That wouldn't give us any additional spaces, but it would at least be a parking for parking application of the money for what that's worth. And then there may be some other options. For example, Bank of the West has a lot over behind and adjacent to Ben Franklin and Bjorn's Heating. That lot seems to be underutilized, and maybe the Bank of the West would look at selling a portion of that to the city, and we could gain some public parking there. So there's some options there I just wanted to put on the table, see what kind of reactions or suggestions there might be from the rest of the council, and maybe we can work toward, creating some motion and decision to try and move forward on some of this, if not today, at some point soon.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, Brent.
I mean, I'm not opposed to anything Scott has to say here, but right now with everything that's going on, I'm looking at a more conservative approach on this, and it's like, personally, we don't need to spend the money at the moment. I'd personally rather see the money that we spent on the Maple Avenue replaced, and then the rest of the money put in the general fund until we wait and see what's going to be going on with the economy and with the LGA and everything else going on right now. Instead of just going out and spending it, I would pretty much rather put it aside and wait and see what happens.
Thanks, Brent. And just to note, the proposed closing is March 1st of 2020, so we have some time to talk through this, and I might suggest that, I think you have some good ideas, Scott, that staff, without spending the money, staff brings us back, looks at these proposals and any others, options that might, because I've heard as well from some of the business owners and the residents that live down there, and whether they're real or perceived concerns, I think that they're valid, right? That we need to address and look at what the proposed project is going to do to the downtown parking. So I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that question. But Andrew, would it be reasonable to have staff look at these or any other options that any other council members have just preliminarily and just bring back what that might look like and what costs, could be for some of these suggestions that Scott made? And what parking they would add, what the distance to the existing parking that's lost, just some of the questions around them?
Yeah, I think we could do that, and with the engineering department's help, we could put a cost to a lot of these various things. Now, if we're looking at acquiring property, that'll be, different conversations we'll have to have with folks. But I think based on the conversation you guys just had, there's a few different options we can pull from that, and we can bring additional information back before the council. And we do have some time, but we'll keep this moving forward.
Sure. Justin, you had a comment or a question?
Just to add on to what Mr. Kwame said in the discussion, I think it'd be imperative to incorporate his ideas and the costs associated, because, let's say to do all that, repave these parking lots and pick up, redo pickets and so on and so forth, if it was, 1.5 million and we got 300,000, that may sway the decision versus the downtown riverfront project that we've been trying to move forward. We're a little short on funding from the state, and, if that project, we could help move that thing forward and still address the concerns of the parking. I think that's obviously a valid concern. I guess I believe if we have a parking issue, that's a good thing. That means we've revitalized downtown, and the businesses should be, filling up if there's a concern on parking, and then we address it. There's nothing wrong with getting in front of it, but it'd be nice to know the impact of those dollars and how much we could stretch them out on his ideas versus, something else that maybe we could do in the corridor downtown. So if we can somehow get that information at a future meeting, that'd be great.
Sure. Jim, did you have a?
Yeah, you mentioned closing, you said 2020, you meant 2021, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I wrote down, yeah, of course. Next, that's the proposed, I mean, we all know how those things work,
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Anthony, did you have a question or comment?
Equally, I would say the same, you know, don't count your chickens before they've hatched. We haven't actually sold the property yet, so,
We
I'm
don't
not
have the money
saying,
in hand.
yeah. So, I mean, I think on that, and I equally would kind of reiterate that I like the idea of kind of using it for parking or replacement of parking, but also I'm in Brent's court a little bit that, you know, we're looking at a $5.3 billion shortage on the state. So we should see what impact that's going to have, because it might be that we need it to help property tax next year too. But as I say, don't count your chickens before they're hatched.
Sure,
Just
and that's-
see the money.
Yeah, and I certainly, I agree, and I think that being proactive is, if we do sell that, looking at the impact that it's going to have on the parking would be the responsible thing to do. So I think with having staff bring us back some options to consider would be a good thing. So thank you for bringing that forward, Scott. Yes, did you have a
Just one other
comment?
question. This is probably a question for Bill, and it's whether or not this $320-some thousand has been incorporated in any of the planning for next year's budget so far.
It is not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll look for staff to kind of take some guys. If any of the other council members have additional ideas, I would encourage them to get them to Andrew, to get to Brian and his team, and bring us back some preliminary information for discussion. So with that, we'll move on to item 3, which is a discussion of the 725 West Maple Avenue property that the city recently acquired. Andrew, do you want to kick off this discussion?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Your Honor. Members, the city recently acquired the property at 725 West Maple Avenue after dealing with stormwater concerns for several years. We spent considerable time studying various options prior to acquiring the property, and quickly determined that it was the most cost-effective strategy for us to just buy the property rather than to make any substantial improvements to the area infrastructure, and also to mitigate or minimize risk to the city. In talking with the city attorney and other folks, we've kind of identified 3 basic options. The first being to sell the property at 725 West Maple as it sits today with appropriate disclosures. The second being to see if there's somebody interested in acquiring the home and garage and moving them from the property. Or then finally, the third option would be to demolish the property and then keep the lot as green space. In talking with the city attorney and also the city's insurance adjuster, both of them have some concern with the city reselling the property, knowing the stormwater issues that exist and the potential for liability as it relates to that, even if we were to make the appropriate disclosures. So with that in mind, we're looking for some direction from the city council. I don't think this is necessarily an urgent matter either. We did winterize the property and had the utilities turned off, so it's not incurring cost for the city at this point in time. So I think if we work towards a resolution in the spring and summer of 2021, we'll be just fine with that. But those are really the options before us, and looking forward to hearing from the council as to what their appetite is with this property.
Is it just the age of this property is 1960s? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I don't know the year off the top of my head, but that appears to be close given the character of the neighborhood. The other thing I should mention is we purchased the property for $126,000. So that's the investment that the city has into the property. Again, I want to reiterate that was by far the cheapest option to address the concerns of the homeowner. And we had dealt with this property for several years. So it wasn't a quick decision to move towards acquiring this property. It was after we've exhausted other remedies and determined that this was the most cost-effective method to the taxpayers.
Yep. Thank you, Andrew. Anthony, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, my feelings are we shouldn't sell it. I mean, we've just got out of one potential litigation, so why do we want to get into another one? I mean, I would look to see if we can sell the home. If we can't sell the home and move it, then we demolish it and we make it a water garden area so that any future water has got somewhere to go.
You know, I wonder if, I think, I hear what you're saying. I wonder if any of the sites that we've purchased and demolished, that there's some way that we could, you know, offer and get a nice starter family home, and work with Habitat for Humanity, work with someone in the community to move that house to a property that we've acquired and demolished in order to maintain that property on the tax rolls, or at least, you know. But I agree, and then we have a retention pond or a water garden or whatever it is to mitigate the areas in the water areas for the neighbors, so. Yes, Scott?
For what it's worth, drove by there to look at it. The house that's on the corner there also happens to be for sale. Just for people that are looking for something in the neighborhood, now you got two neighboring properties that are for sale. And whether or not the neighbors would, you see it happen occasionally where neighbors will buy a property that has common borders and split it. I don't know what it would take, but I would guess it's possible for us, now that we own the property, that we could remove the home, demolish the home, clear the property, whatever, but then put a condition on any future use of it that it couldn't be built as a house again, so that we're not going to have any sort of potential liability. And then if we were to resell it with those kind of conditions, I think maybe we would offset the concern as far as the liability. The flooding concern for a house is one thing, but if it's an open green space, you know, Anthony talked about, you know, demolishing it so we don't have that problem. Well, I understand that, but if we sold it to somebody and there was no allowance for there being a house there, wouldn't that take care of our liability on it, I guess is what I'm thinking. We've got a lot of parkland and a lot of green space, and I'm not against it for that reason only. It just seems like one more thing to maintain, that if we could take care of it in a way that we can be done with it, if it splits up to the other neighbors in the area in some way or whatever, but isn't redeveloped in any way, maybe that would be a good way to go forward.
Sure. Brent, did you have a?
Well, I mean, being there, I think part of the problem they had there, if we were to divide it up like you said, that would even maybe mitigate some of that water issue, is initially that driveway was on the other side of the house. And then when they built that garage, that driveway got moved over to here, and that just happened to be right where the drain was that goes down. I mean, once this is cleared up, I mean, if that curbing is put back in there, I believe that's going to mitigate a lot of the water, because it's going to be able to carry it on down and around. So, I mean, once they, sounded like even what the owner said, once that approach got moved, and then it got moved to right where there was a drain at, I think that would mitigate some of the problems, like if somebody wanted it for green space on each side, as far as limiting the amount of water that would go onto the property.
Guy, do we have any lots currently that we've acquired and demolished and not resold?
No, we don't. The
We
one
sold
that we had most recently was
most-
that 320 West Alcott. That's
Okay.
I like Anthony's point. I mean, we're working on cleaning up some space in town on some projects and houses, and I think, you know, in the future, I think it wouldn't behoove us to hold it a little bit, and there's probably going to be another property in the next few years to come available where this potentially could get moved to. It's a 1977 build, and I think it's probably in pretty good shape from externally looking at it when we've been there. And then what we do with the existing property, I mean, there's quite a few options. We could hold that until a future point. I know the utilities at some point down the road maybe are going to need to be addressed, but it's not an urgent timing thing, so it could be something we hold till, you know, we make changes to the street, or if that's too far down the road, then the idea of splitting up between the property owners might be a good option. But I think I'd hate to see us just have more expense in wrecking it, and then we've got green space for
Sure.
nothing. So
I think that kind of, I think we're on the same page, as at least of waiting, not reselling the property, and giving it a little time to see if we can find a new home for that, a lot for that home. So, all right, with that, we're just about on time. Couple miscellaneous announcements. Office is closed tomorrow. Happy Veterans Day, everyone. Friday, don't forget, 7:30 right here. We're going to canvass the election results. And November 16th, next Monday night, is the city council meeting. With that, we're adjourned.